All right, strap in, everybody. Today's deep dive takes us to a place you might not expect. We're looking at the Bible, but not the usual stuff.
Right, yeah.
This article we found, it talks about all the insults in the Bible. Some really harsh ones, actually.
Oh, yeah. It turns out those prophets and apostles, they weren't afraid to throw down.
Not at all.
And what's really interesting, it's not just, like, random anger.
No.
These insults, they actually tell us a lot about the culture and stuff back then, like what people believed and who had power and all that.
That's what I love about these deep dives, finding the hidden stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so let's jump in. First up, Mount Carmel, Elijah versus the prophets of Baal. What's going on here?
Well, in ancient Israel, Baal worship was a big deal, a real problem for the Israelites and their faith in Yahweh.
Why is that?
Baal was like the god of fertility and power, and they had these crazy rituals, like the Israelites saw it as totally pagan.
So Elijah, he's not just going after these prophets, he's going after their whole belief system.
Exactly. And he does it, how do I put this? He's pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah.
So these prophets are begging Baal to send fire from heaven. They're getting desperate.
Right.
And Elijah just starts mocking them.
Like how? What does he say?
Oh, he says maybe Bill's too busy, chatting with someone on a trip or even in the bathroom to answer their prayers.
Whoa, that's intense. Not exactly what I pictured a prophet saying. I mean, was he just trying to be funny?
I think there's some humor there. But you gotta remember, words had a lot of power back then. So by making fun of Baal, Elijah's showing how empty it is to worship a god who can't even do something simple.
Yeah.
Like answer a prayer.
Right. So he's showing the people how silly it is to put their faith in something so weak.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you think, like, how do we use humor today to challenge ideas we disagree with?
That's a good point.
Like satire, right? Always been a powerful tool.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on from Elijah and his fiery showdown. Let's talk about Job. The guy who loses everything, family, wealth, health.
Yeah, poor Job.
And then his friends show up, supposedly to comfort him.
Hmm.
But they just make things worse.
Oh, they're the worst. They basically tell him he deserves all this suffering.
Like he did something wrong.
Yeah, talk about rubbing salt in the wound.
And Job, of course, he snaps. He calls them out for their empty words. He even says, "Miserable comforters are you all."
Right, like, thanks for nothing.
We've all been there, right? When someone tries to give advice, but it just feels like they're judging you.
Totally, yeah. It's that feeling of being completely misunderstood when you're already down.
Absolutely. So Job's response, it shows how much we need real empathy. Someone to just be there with you in your pain, not try to explain it away.
Yeah, for sure. And it ties into the whole book of Job, doesn't it? Like, what is suffering? Why does it happen? Can we keep our faith when things are bad?
Big questions.
It also makes you think about how we treat people who are hurting, Are we really there for them, or are we just making things worse?
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, from the Old Testament, let's jump to the New Testament, to Jesus himself.
All right.
Now, we think of Jesus as this loving, compassionate guy,
Yeah.
but he could also be pretty tough, especially when he saw hypocrisy.
Oh, yeah. He didn't hold back.
Like when he calls out the Pharisees, the religious leaders, he calls them whitewashed tombs.
Ooh, that's a rough one.
It is. What did he mean by that? Why that specific image?
Well, in Jewish law, anything dead, like a tomb, made you unclean.
Right.
So by calling them whitewashed tombs, Jesus is saying they're not just hypocrites, they're actually dangerous to people's souls.
Wow. So he's not just criticizing their actions, he's saying they're a threat.
Exactly. And the image is so powerful because it makes you think about how we might be putting on a show, looking good on the outside while being messed up inside.
Makes you think. It's like, are there whitewashed tombs today? People or organizations that seem good but are actually bad.
You bet. Lots of them. It's a reminder to look beyond the surface, to see what's really going on.
Absolutely. And speaking of speaking truth to power, we can't forget about the Apostle Paul. He was known for being, well, a bit fiery. And he didn't shy away from confronting anyone.
Yeah, Paul was definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Especially those who disagreed with his teachings.
He had a whole arsenal of insults. Called people dogs, evil workers, false apostles, you name it.
But what did calling someone a dog even mean back then? To us, it almost sounds funny.
Oh, it was serious back then. Dogs were seen as, like, scavengers, unclean. So calling someone a dog meant they were morally corrupt, like total outcasts.
So the meaning of words can really change over time.
Oh, for sure. But even though the words might mean something different now, we can still see how passionate Paul was.
Yeah, I get that.
Like, he really cared about those early Christians. And he wasn't afraid to use strong language to warn them about false teachings and stuff.
So it's a reminder that sometimes speaking truth takes courage. You got to be willing to challenge those in authority.
Yeah, and risk offending people. Sometimes a well-placed insult can wake people up, shake them out of their comfort zone and make them face the truth.
Okay, before we move on, I want to talk about Isaiah's take on idol worship. It's so funny. He talks about how people cut down a tree, use half of it for firewood to cook dinner, and then worship the other half as a god.
Oh, yeah, that's classic. Such a clever way to show how ridiculous idol worship is. Like, you're literally worshiping something you just use to roast your vegetables.
Right. It's hilarious, but it makes you think, what are we worshiping today? Money? Fame? Technology? Are we putting our faith in things that can't really make us happy?
Good question. Are we giving our hearts to things that are temporary and empty?
All right, let's finish this first part with the ultimate underdog story. David versus Goliath. David, even before the fight, starts talking trash. He tells Goliath, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth."
Talk about confidence. David's not just saying he'll win, he's describing exactly how it'll go down.
Yeah, he's basically saying, I'm not just going to beat you, I'm going to make an example of you. But it seems like his confidence comes from his faith in God.
Oh, totally. David's not relying on himself. He's putting his trust in something bigger. And that's where his courage comes from.
That's a good point. It reminds us that even when we face huge challenges, faith can give us strength.
And sometimes a bit of trash talk, if it comes from a good place, can really pump you up to face your feels.
So that's it for part one of our deep dive into biblical insults. We've seen some epic takedowns, from Elijah mocking Baal to Jesus condemning the Pharisees to David's pre-fight smack talk.
Yeah, some real zingers.
But this is just the beginning.
Oh yeah, there's more.
In part two, we'll go deeper. We'll look at the reasons behind these insults, what they tell us about human nature, and what we can learn from them today.
Right, the good stuff.
So stay tuned. Things are about to get really interesting.
You bet. So we've heard some pretty strong language from these guys in the Bible.
Yeah, definitely not holding back.
But I'm curious, what do you think about these insults? I mean, is there like a pattern to them?
Well, besides being like super harsh, I think what gets me is how they're not just random. There's always a point to them, a deeper message.
Exactly. It's not just venting, right? It's about exposing hypocrisy,
Yeah.
challenging those in power, defending the truth.
Yeah, it's like they're using these words to cut through the BS and get to the real issue.
Yes. And it makes you realize the Bible isn't just stories and morals. It shows us the culture, the politics, the power struggles of that time.
So these insults, they give us a glimpse of how people actually talked and interacted back then.
Totally. And even though some of the words might seem weird or even offensive to us now, we got to remember that language changes over time.
Right, we can't judge them by today's standards.
Exactly. The key is to understand the context, What did those words mean back then? What were they trying to say?
Yeah, makes sense.
And when you do that, you might be surprised how relevant those old words still are. Our problems might be different, but the basic human struggles, pride, greed, hypocrisy, those are timeless.
It makes you wonder, if these biblical figures were alive today, what would they be saying? What would they call us out on?
Ooh, that's a fun thought. Imagine Elijah, right, seeing someone glued to their phone, totally ignoring the world around them. What would he say?
I don't know, maybe something like, have you become so obsessed with that little screen that you've forgotten the amazing world God made?
I can hear him saying it now, all fiery and passionate. Or think about Jesus, right? And all the people who talk about tolerance online but spread hate and division. What would he say to them?
Maybe. Your actions speak louder than your words. You claim to love your neighbor, but your behavior tells a different story.
Yeah, that's it. And Paul, right. What would he say to those people spreading fake news and conspiracy theories, rejecting facts and logic?
Oh, Paul would let them have it. Knowing him, he'd probably say something like, snap out of it, you're living a lie. Open your eyes to the truth.
I love it. It's so interesting to imagine how these guys would react to our world today, but it also shows that their words still have power. They can challenge us, make us think, and inspire us to live better lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main thing you want people to take away from all this?
I'd say, don't be afraid to really think about the Bible. Don't just accept what you've been told. Question things. Dig deeper. Be open to new ideas.
It's about approaching the Bible with curiosity, not fear. Right.
Exactly. And remember, it's not one big story, it's a bunch of different voices and perspectives. So embrace that. See the nuances. Let yourself be challenged by it.
And hey, maybe even have some fun with it. Who knew the Bible could be so uh, spicy?
Yeah, those prophets and apostles, they definitely knew how to use words. And even though we might not use their exact language, I think we can learn from them, like
Yeah.
how to stand up for what we believe in, even if it ruffles some feathers.
Sometimes you got to be bold to get your point across.
Right. Sugarcoating doesn't always work. Sometimes you need a little fire to get people's attention.
So to everyone listening, keep exploring the Bible. Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Wrestle with it. You might be amazed at what you find.
You never know, it might have more to offer than you ever thought.
Man, it's amazing how these old texts can still get us so fired up.
I know, right?
Feels like we've just scratched the surface here.
Yeah, for sure. There's so much more we could talk about. The Bible's full of these little moments that, like, flip your perspective on things.
Totally. And that's what's so cool about these deep dives, right?
Yeah.
It's not about memorizing verses or like getting stuck in the rules. It's about actually engaging with this stuff, asking questions, finding new meanings.
It's like the Bible's alive, you know? Still talking to us all these years later.
So as we wrap up all this talk about biblical insults, what's the one thing you hope people take away from it?
I think the big thing is don't be afraid to think critically about the Bible. Yeah.
Don't just take it at face value,
Yeah.
what you were taught or whatever. Really dig in, ask questions, be open to different ways of seeing things.
I like that. Approaching it with curiosity, not fear.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just one voice, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch of different voices, different points of view, different styles of writing. So enjoy that. Look for the nuances. Let it challenge you.
And hey, maybe even have some fun with it. Who knew the Bible could be so, well, feisty?
It's true. Those prophets and apostles, they didn't mess around. And okay, maybe we wouldn't use their exact words today, but I think we can learn something from their attitude, like how to stand up for what you believe in, even if it pisses some people off.
Right. Sometimes being nice doesn't cut it. Sometimes you got to be a little forceful to get people to listen.
Exactly. So to everyone out there listening, keep digging into the Bible. Keep asking those tough questions. Wrestle with it even.
Yeah, don't be afraid to get a little uncomfortable.
You might be surprised at what you find. Well said. That wraps up our deep dive into the world of biblical insults. Hope you enjoy this little trip through the sassier side of Scripture.
Yeah, it's been fun.
We'd love to hear what you think, What insults stuck with you, and what are some modern-day equivalents? Come on, get creative. Share your thoughts with us on social media.
Yeah, let's keep this conversation going.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper.